Hi, this is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and I'm excited to bring you a tutorial for the Bernat Soft Striped Crochet Hexagon Rug, which is a free pattern I designed for yarnspirations.com. To make this pattern, you'll need 3 colors of Bernat Forever Fleece. I used rosehip, matcha, and balsam, but you can use whichever colors you like. 1 ball of each color is enough. You'll also need a US 13 9mm crochet hook or whatever size gets you gauge. It's also helpful to have stitch markers and a yarn needle. You'll need a larger yarn needle for this project, as it is a super bulky 6 yarn. The finished rug is approximately 46 inches wide and 21.5 inches deep. You can continue to make this rug bigger if you like, but then you will need more yarn to do so. Now, the soft striped crochet hexagon rug is actually a half hexagon, as you can see here. We start in the middle and work our way out row by row, changing colors with every row to create this great striped pattern. You'll also see a little bit of extra definition here. That comes from working in the back loop and the front loop alternately, so that on the right side of the rug we get this great texture. But you can see here on the back, it's still quite smooth. Finally, a round of single crochet is added as a border to finish it off. As I say, the instructions call for 1 ball of each, but if you want to get more yarn, you can keep on making this rug just as big as you like. Just continue on in pattern. So let's go ahead and get started on our crochet hexagon rug. Now, because we're using 3 colors and we're changing colors every row, it's a good idea to get your yarn laid out ahead of time. If you'd like to only use 1 color, of course, you don't need to do that. You can just go ahead and get that ready to go. However, if you want to only use 2 colors, you'll need to change colors just every 2 rows. 3 colors allows us to pull the colors up along the sides, that we don't have to cut them at the end of every row. But with 2 colors, in order to make that work, you would need to change colors only every 2 rows. So with 3 colors, we can go ahead and do 1 row in each color and change colors each row, and the next yarn will always be ready and available on that side. So now you'll see what I mean. But let's go ahead and start with our first color, color A. We're going to begin with a magic ring. To make a magic ring, we begin by going in about 6 or 7 inches from the end of the yarn, and then we're going to wrap that yarn over our non-hook hand first finger twice, towards me. Sounds like a lot, but simply take the end of the yarn, wrap it over your finger twice. Then we're going to insert our hook under both of those loops, grab that first one right back there, slide it under the first one, and chain 1. This locks your loops together, and as we continue for row 1, you want to make sure to work into that loop and over this tail end right there. You can see there is that cut end right there. This will allow us to cinch up that circle nice and tight when we're done with row 1. So to continue with row 1, we're going to start with a chain 3. And for this pattern, the chain 3 at the beginning will always count as our first double crochet. So after we've chained 3, then we continue by working 7 double crochets into the ring. So we yarn over, and as I say, you just want to make sure you go right into that ring and under that tail end and close that in each one of those double crochets. So now that I've sort of got a couple stitches going there, I can get my finger out of the way. And there's 1. Just want to go right in that circle and right over that tail again. And there's 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. There we go. And 7. Now, remember that chain 3 did officially count as a double crochet, so we should actually have 8 stitches here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's perfect. Let's go ahead and take a moment to put a stitch marker in the top of that chain 3. That will help us mark that very first stitch and help us remember that chain 3 is a double crochet, and it does count as a stitch, not just a turning chain. Then, of course, we can cinch up that circle. We've worked over that tail end. I'm going to just pull that active loop up a little bit more here so it doesn't come out. But then we can just grab that tail and pull it really tight, and that will close up that first row there, nice and flat. So now we'll be set up to start making our hexagons. Just make sure when you weave this end in that you go through that loop in both directions. That will lock in that magic circle and keep it nice and closed. Now for row 2, we're actually going to switch to our second color. For me, that's this green matcha color here. So to do that, we actually want to stop on that last stitch. So I'm going to pull it out just a little bit here. And I started that double crochet, but now I've pulled out that last loop. So you can see I would have to yarn over and pull through to finish the stitch. Instead, I'm going to yarn over and pull through with our next color. So just come several inches in, drape that right over my hook, and pull through to finish that very last stitch. And now we're all set up for row 2. So before you begin row 2, I recommend you grab a couple extra stitch markers and have those at the ready. So to begin, we're going to start with a chain 3, and that will again be our first double crochet of this row. So if you like, you can go ahead and put a stitch marker in the top of that chain 3. Then we can turn and work back the other direction. Now, our even numbered rows here are the wrong side rows. Our first row, that was the right side of the rug. Now we're in an even numbered row. This is the wrong side of the rug. The wrong side rows are worked in the front loop only, while the even numbered rows, the odd numbered rows after this will be worked in the back loop only. Right now we're on an even numbered row, so we're front loop only. What does that mean? If we look at the row before us, the row that we're working into, there are those 2 loops of the V on top. The front loop is always the loop that's closest to you, the crocheter. The back loop is the one that's always furthest away. So it doesn't matter if you're working in rows or in the round, if you're turning your work or not, the front loop is closest to you and the back loop is the one furthest away. So for this row, since we're on a wrong side row, an even numbered row, we want to work under that front loop only. So we start by putting a double crochet in that first stitch. So we've got our chain 3 there for our first double crochet. And go back into that first stitch there, go under just that front loop and make a double crochet. And then we work a front loop double crochet in the next stitch. Go to the next stitch, just go into that very front loop right there. Then we're going to work 3 front loop double crochets in the next stitch and place a stitch marker in the center of those 3 stitches. So let's go ahead and do those together. We've got our front loop only there. 1, 2, let me get that yarn out of the way so it's a little easier to see here. 2 and 3. There we are. So now we want to go ahead and place a stitch marker right in the center of those 3 stitches we just made. And just go ahead, mark both those loops. There we are. And now that stitch is marked. That's going to be our increase point as we continue to make our rug and creates that great half hexagon shape. So then we are going to front loop double crochet in each of the next 2 stitches. So we yarn over, find the next stitch, go under just that front loop. You can see there's that unused loop in the back, creating that great texture. So there's 1 in that stitch, and then 1 in the next stitch. Then it's time to do another one of those increases. 3 double crochets in the front loop of the next stitch and place a stitch marker in the center of those 3. So there's 1, 2, and I ran out of green yarn here. Let me pull up just a little bit more so we can finish this row. There's 3. And now I can grab that stitch marker and put the stitch marker right in the center of those 3 double crochets. There we are. Then we front loop double crochet in the next stitch. And then that brings us to our last stitch, the top of that marked chain 3 there. So we want to kind of turn that around. We want to work 2 front loop double crochets in that very last stitch. So just look at the top of that chain 3, you can see there with the stitch marker, it still has that V, so we can still go under that front loop only. May need to move the stitch marker out of there. You can move that out ahead of time if it's in your way. But there is 1 and 2. So now we can go ahead and move that stitch marker. And there we are at the end of row 2. We should have a total of 14 double crochets. And that's including that beginning chain 3. Remember, these are all worked in the front loop only. And now you can see there's that unused loop that's going to create the texture as we continue on with our pattern. So now we're ready to begin row 3. But once again, I've gone a little too far. I need to stop before I switch those colors there. So let's make that last stitch of row 2 again together. I'm going to yarn over, go into that front loop, stop with 2 loops left on the hook. And now I want to grab my color 3 or my color C and go ahead and yarn over and pull that one through. So that will finish the stitch. And if you pulled through a little too soon, you can just pull down on that tail, give yourself a little bit more room. And that will finish our stitch for row 2. And this will be our color now for row 3. So now we can begin row 3. And row 3 and row 4 are going to be the 2 rows that we repeat to continue on this pattern all the way until we're ready for our border. So for row 3, we start again with our chain of 3. And of course, that will be our first double crochet. for this row. So we can mark that if you like. And then we can turn. And once again, we want to leave that color hanging out there on the side for us. Just snug that one down and weave that in, end in when you are done. So then, since now we're working on the right side, we can see right there, there's that first row. Now we're on an odd numbered row, row 3. We're going to be working in the back loop only. So now we yarn over and go under just that back loop. Just go right into the middle of the stitch there for this double crochet. There we are. And as you change colors, you may need to take some time to sort of untangle your skeins, flip them over each other. It's always a good idea to take your time and do that as you work. So to continue on with this pattern, it's really quite simple. We just work that second double crochet there in that first stitch, and then we back loop double crochet until we get to a marked stitch. So just one stitch in the back loop only of each stitch across until we get to that first marked stitch. Whoops. This is a bulky yarn, so it can take a little extra effort here. There we are. Let's get that on there. And then, we've come to that marked stitch. I worked that double crochet right in our marked stitch. That's fine. We need 2 more. So there's 1 and 2, and I'm still making these in that back loop only. There we are. So that's our marked stitch. Let's go ahead and use that stitch marker and move it on up to the center of those 3. Again, we're just going to maintain that increase point on out. So then we back loop only, double crochet across to the next marked stitch. I'll need to pull up some more of the balsam color here. There we are. So we're just going to continue double crocheting in that back loop only. Now we've come to that next marked stitch, so we want to put 3 double crochets in the back loop only of this one. 1, 2, 3. Get that stitch finished. There we go. So now we need to move that stitch marker on up and put that in the center of those 3. And then we can just back loop only, double crochet on across to that last stitch, which we know will be a chain 3. There we are. And now we've come to that very last stitch there. So we want to put 2 back loop only double crochets in that stitch. So there's 1 and 2. And this time I'm going to remember not to finish that last stitch because we want to pull up our first color. We've gone through our 3 colors. So now it's time to switch back to that first color. And this is where we left it attached to the side. And this is where having 3 colors really works out for the best. You want to go ahead and find that first one there. Give it a little tug because sometimes that stitch will have opened up. And then we're just going to float it right along the side of your work. So you want to yarn over and finish your stitch with that color. And as you do that, I like to give it a little bit of a wiggle back and forth on my hook and with my hand. The goal, and if I lay this out, it might be a little bit easier here to see, but the goal is you want to have it just running right along the edge of your work here so that when we make our border, we can crochet over it and that will disappear. So you just want to do that little wiggle so that you make sure it's not too tight, because if it's too tight, you can see how that will scrunch up your rug or your project. You don't want it like that. And you don't want it too loose because then it's loose and floppy and your stitches will have trouble. And of course, your border will have trouble covering it up. So just take your time and sort of, like I say, pull back and forth a little bit so that it feels like it's the right height. It's going through that stitch, but there's not extra tension there and there's not extra looseness. After that, you'll be ready to begin row 4. So row 4 continues our pattern just as we've been doing with a beginning chain 3 that counts as our first double crochet. So I removed that stitch marker. We can move it on up into this stitch. And then of course we can turn and we're basically continuing our pattern that we've been doing all the way across. Now we're on a wrong side row again. You can tell that here's all my texture on the right side. I'm on an even numbered row, so I'm on the wrong side. So now I'm going to be working in the front loop only. I yarn over and do a front loop double crochet in that first stitch. Remember, we always have 2 stitches in the first and last stitch of each row. And then we just front loop only double crochet across until we get to that marked stitch. There we are. So just front loop double crochet until you get to that first marked stitch. And then of course, when you get to that marked stitch, That's where we work 3 stitches and place the stitch marker in the center of those 3. So you just keep working in pattern for a total of 21 rows. Now that's as written, using 1 ball of yarn in each color, so 3 balls of yarn here total. If you wanted to make your rug bigger or smaller, of course, you'll need more yarn or possibly less yarn. Now I've come to that marked stitch. So I'm going to do 3 stitches in there. Let me pull up a little bit more of the pink here. So there's 1, 2, there we go, and 3. And then we can move that stitch marker right on up to that center stitch. And then, of course, just front loop only, double crochet again until you get that next marked stitch. Pull up some more of the pink here. I picked some really soft, subtle colors here, and Bernat Forever Fleece comes in some really gorgeous colors. So you can definitely pick the colors that match your own home decor for your own custom look. Or like I say, you can do it all in one color or change the number of colors that you're changing. Just remember, as long as you've got an odd numbered row, you'll be able to float them along the sides. With an even numbered row, you'll need to do 2 stripes of each color, or 2 rows of each color in order to float it along the side. So here we are at that marked stitch again. We're going to go into that front loop only and do our 3 stitches there. And of course, we'll need to move that stitch marker on up. I'm going to pull up some more yarn here. You'll notice I'm pulling from the outside of these balls. The Bernat Forever Fleece is wound to be an outside pull skein. So there's our second one, and then our third one. There we are. So then I want to move that stitch marker right on up to the center of those 3 double crochets. And then we're ready to just front loop only double crochet on across to the end. And of course, want to make sure to put 2 double crochets in the front loop of that very last stitch. There we go. Almost there. Got 1 more to go. And now we're back at that marked stitch, that chain 3. So we can flip it over a little bit. Find those 2 loops at the top. So we can go under just that front loop now. For 1 and 2. And now, before I finish that second one, we're ready to switch colors again. So what comes after the pink is the green, or your color B, whatever that is. That end should be hanging out right there. Not the cut end, but the end attached to the skein. So now we can just pull that up and do the same thing. Drape it right over your hook and pull that through your stitch. And just sort of give it a wiggle back and forth so that that stitch is the same size as the other stitches and it's not too tight or too loose right along the edge here. And then you're ready to chain 3 and turn again, of course, and just continue on in pattern. You just keep repeating rows 3 and 4. You can see here from the right side of the rug, we're getting that great little extra texture by working in that front loop or back loop only, depending on the row. We've got our increases here that are going to keep growing out to give us that great half hexagon shape. And we've got this really smooth backing. So you just continue repeating those 2 rows in 3 colors or however many colors you want to make until you've got 21 rows or until you've got the rug to the size you like. Then we're ready to work the border. So when you've worked through your 21 rows or you've made the rug to the size you desire, you need to end on a 3rd row repeat, basically after making a right side row. Then you can break whatever yarns you don't want to use for your border. Just recommend that you leave whatever yarn you want to use for your border as the last one attached. On the original rug, that put me back at the pink color, but of course you can use whichever color you desire for your border. I finished the last stitch of the last row with my border color, and then we're not going to turn. So we're not going to turn and work back on the wrong side. We're going to work the border from the right side of the fabric. So we start with a chain 1. Oops, there we go. And then we're actually going to turn and work across the top of our rug here. And we're just going to work right into the sides of those stitches. But when we do that, we want to make sure to work over those floats as well. So when you work into the side of a double crochet stitch, I find that it works best to put 2 single crochets, since we're making single crochets for this row, in the side of each stitch. 2 stitches, whatever kind. This time we're making single crochets. So I'm just going to go right into that stitch, and I want to make sure, as I say, to cover that float and crochet right over it. So there's 1, and then I'll do a second one in that double crochet there, and there's 2, and that brings us to the next double crochet. So sometimes we're going to have 2 floats along the side, and that's okay. We want to make sure to cover both of those as well. So we'll put 2 in the side of this row. There's 1, and then 2. And then we just continue right along the top here until we come to that end. So I'll meet you at the end here of basically the straight edge of our rug. So here I've single crocheted evenly right across the top edge of our rug here. Again, the exact number of stitches here doesn't matter. So if you want to fudge those, switch them around a little bit, work a different number inside of each row, whatever works for you. We just want a nice straight line there. Then when you've gotten to that edge right here, then it's time to chain 2, 1, 2, and we're going to back loop single crochet in each stitch across here until we get to that marked stitch. So we've got our first marked stitch right there. That would have been that chain 3. So we want to go in just the back loop of that one. Oops. Try that again. There we go. Then I can go ahead and get that stitch marker out of the way as well. And then we just back loop single crochet across here. So we're going right into the middle of that stitch again. Now we're just making single crochets. And this will give our rug just that last little bit of definition here along the border. So we're working our way to that first marked stitch here where our increases were, because we're going to need to continue those increases so that this last row lays nice and flat. So we've got one more stitch here before our increase, our marked stitch. Now we've come to that first marked stitch. I'm going to go ahead and move the stitch marker to the side. We don't need that anymore, but we are going to put 3 single crochets in that back loop only there. So there's 1, 2, and 3. We don't need to mark the second one because, this is our last row. Then we just continue on across. Back loop only, single crochet in each stitch until you get to that next marked stitch. So here I am at our second marked stitch. So it's time to work 3 back loop only single crochets in there. Get that stitch marker out of the way. So there's 2 and 3. And you can see how that sort of just really emphasizes that point there for our half hexagon. And then we continue on across here. And this should take us right up to the first stitch here of our round, our edging round or our finishing border round. But we want to make sure that we mimic what we did at the other end here. So I'm just going to work my way over. Again, we're staying in that back loop only. We're almost there. So there's our last stitch. So to mimic what we did at the very beginning of this round, we want to again chain 2. And then we can go ahead and cut our yarn and join. Oops, there we go. Try that again. Now we can join to that first stitch of the round. So you can join with a slip stitch, or what I like to do is just pull up on that end. So I've got the end of the yarn here. And then I'm going to take one of my yarn needles, whichever style you prefer. Go ahead and thread that end on the needle there. And then we want to find the top of that very first stitch we made of our round, put the needle under those top 2 loops, pull that end through, send it right back down into the center of that last chain we made. And we can pull that up snug, and that will mimic the top of a stitch and it will blend in beautifully with our rug. From there, you can just weave in your ends. And that's how to crochet the Bernat Soft Striped Crochet Hexagon Rug. I hope you've enjoyed this pattern, and I hope you'll give Bernat Forever Fleece a try. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.